Back in the early 2000s, around the age of 13, I lived in upstate New York in the town of Rhinebeck. Rhinebeck is an old and fairly sleepy place, all things considered. Our house was high on a hill surrounded by dense woods on all sides except for the street. The home was quiet and incredibly secluded. Our nearest neighborhood was about a quarter mile down a winding and poorly maintained road with only a singular streetlight that was way too dim to offer much visibility. For this story, I'll give you an idea to the layout of the house. It was 2 stories. The stairs were situated in the middle of the house. Our most common point of entry was through the 2-car garage. The front door was to the right of the garage entry, and standing from that door, you could look up to the stairs to your left center and see to the top. At the top of the stairs, my parents' room was on the immediate right. To the left there was a hallway with 2 rooms side by side at the very end. Mine and my brother's. My room was situated over the garage. Now for the story. I had always been very on edge about where we lived, as it gave me a sort of Mothman Prophecies kind of vibe. You could hear every twig snap, every coyote and bird. And when it got dark out, well, it was very dark. Late one night, I had long since gone to bed and was jarred awake by a sound below my room. I sat shocked still for a moment, listening to the deafening silence before accepting that I'd been dreaming. Just as I started to drift off, I started to hear scratching. It was very slow at first and hard to make out, almost like the sound of metal scraping against slate. It started to become more deliberate, and I pinpointed it to the garage door that entered into the house. My first thought was go to my parents, but it occurred to me that if I stood outside their door, I would be easily seen at the top of the stairs should someone get in or already be in. The noise continued, and I finally crawled out of my bed as quietly as possible to lock my bedroom door, and then pick up the cordless phone from my desk before bolting back. It had felt like hours had passed by, but I don't know exactly when the scratching came to a stop. By morning, I had just pushed it to the back of my mind as a dream. Sitting around the kitchen the next day, I told my parents about the dream. They looked concerned, and out of curiosity, we went and looked at the garage door, which was a very heavy metal finish door. What we found on the other side were pry marks, as though someone had repeatedly jammed a crowbar into the door frame. I stared in disbelief, and I was totally creeped out. My father changed the lock on the outermost door that day. To this day, we still don't know what happened, but it really creeps us out. Before I begin this story, I just want to add that I have no prejudice or issues with anyone of Middle Eastern descent. Anything I say is honestly just to describe the people around me and the situation as it happened. My mother and stepfather live in Europe, and I had visited them for Christmas break. I was an undergrad in a large New York City school, so I was flying Frankfurt to JFK. Because I'm highly intelligent, I read my flight time as 11:50, when it was actually 11:05. Cue me dashing through the airport and barely making it on the last bus to the tarmac, which was reserved for people who had to go through a secondary hand search of belongings security check. As I had just barreled my way through a large international airport, I was one of those lucky few. The rest, all Middle Eastern, from families with kids and elderly women and mostly single men. Anywho, I had just barely made it. The bus had closed its doors and was ready to leave until I came flying out with an out-of-breath German airport agent trailing behind me. I was covered in sweat and quite embarrassed, but thankful that I made it, as the semester had started the next day. I observed my fellow security risks and noticed a middle-aged man in what I would say is traditional Middle Eastern clothing. He was in a white sort of robe that went down to his ankles and the sleeves to his wrists. He had some headgear on. It appeared to be a cap with an embroidered design that circled fully around his head and barely extended past the top of his skull. I only noticed him and subsequently his clothing because he was on the phone and he was sobbing. Not the quiet sniffle cry that I did when I realized I had messed up the time, but full-on hiccuping cries while he talked on the phone. I felt really bad for him. He was speaking in Arabic, so I didn't know what was going on. But I could imagine that maybe it was along the lines of him being upset that he might miss his flight, as our bus wasn't guaranteed to get to the plane in time. We get on the plane, make our way to our seats, and I'm pretty delighted to find that I'm in the aisle with no one in the middle, and a decently good-looking girl in the window seat. The crying man was behind me as we shuffled down the aisles. I noticed that he had no carry-on luggage, but didn't really care. Once I sat down, he kept going, looked around a bit confused, then sat down in the middle of about 5 unoccupied middle rows. Having myself been shuttled back and forth across the Atlantic many times before, I know that was where the flight attendant would set up their sleep area for the rest in between shifts. I was about to tell him that, but a FA swooped in and directed him to the seat on his ticket, which was in the middle row directly behind me. He was still crying, but I cry a lot too, so I don't think much of it. Thankful that I was safely on the plane and heading back to the good old US of A, I settled in and tuned out the welcome video that had started playing. Well, that didn't last very long. The video paused as the FA made the customary greeting to everyone. Taxiing begins, and I'm on my way back to studiously playing soccer and getting learned. There's a commotion behind me, and the man from before then stands up, starts crying harder, sobs and hiccups aplenty, and once the FA speech is done, he then yells,
"This lady's lying. This plane isn't going to New York."
This dude is scream-sobbing in a mixture of English and Arabic. I'm just waiting for us to get up in the air and the drink service, so I can get my, drink on. He graciously slid past the woman in the aisle, and then started screaming and gesticulating at the various FAs stationed around. He then utters what every owner of a lily-white butt has been conditioned to fear. Allah. To be more specific,
New York is a lie. They're lying to us. Allah will deliver us to paradise.
There were more pronouncements, but as they were in a mix of English and Arabic, I don't quite remember. Essentially, they were the last freaking thing that you'd want to hear on a plane, whether you're 30k feet in the air or sitting on the tarmac. Judging by the faces of everyone around, they were scared. His shouting was then solely in Arabic. My exhausted and stressed brain could only think, if I just freaking sprinted to get on this plane and then something happens and I die, I'm going to be really outraged. I mean, also I would be dead, but I would still be outraged. Our plane screeches to a halt. Well, it slowly rumbles into a plane park, and the German police surround our plane and unceremoniously charge down the aisles. They have body armor and guns all over, and they take him off the plane and presumably into custody. Due to our proximity to him, the passengers in the rows in front of and behind him were questioned by the police. Me being a member of the bus of public enemies, I got grilled even harder. I told him I'm a stupid American who got my times mixed up, admitted to my sin, got baptized, and I was finally released. We told him that as far as we knew, he had no carry-on luggage, and the agents in the airport said he hadn't checked any baggage. This guy continued screaming various iterations of,
"This plane isn't going to New York,"
as he was hauled off in cuffs, which doesn't quite make for a relaxing 10-hour trip. The flight was pretty uneventful afterwards, but there was obvious tension in the air. I have always hated flying, and this certainly didn't help. So, man in the front row behind me that totally freaked out on the plane. I'd really like it if we'd never meet ever again.
The following story comes from 2013, when I was making my living as a bartender in a small lounge just off Washington Square Park. Lopez was a Sunday brunch regular that I dreaded seeing every weekend. An elderly Latino man, he was both very gay and very wealthy, having formerly been a high-ranking employee at the UN. It may seem strange to say, but Lopez was different from your average gay man. He was a special breed. He had been gay since being gay in New York City was dangerous. This has made him tough and pushy. Though Lopez was old and frail in appearance, he was an intimidating bastard in spirit. When he had set his eyes on a target, nothing could frighten him off its trail. I, unfortunately, became that target before even realizing it. I was a tall, broad-shouldered 25-year-old man at the time. My image was the last thing that came to mind when I thought about victim of sexual harassment. That's why it caught me so off guard. At first, Lopez and I made the regular small talk. I told him about myself. He told me about himself. Then I served his glass of Albarino and went about my business. Soon, however, Lopez began staying through my entire shift and demanding my attention virtually the entire time. He would even go out of his way to frighten off the other regulars I'd chat with. His tone changed. It went from cordial to syrupy sweet. The conversations he'd trapped me in began focusing more and more on past sexual exploits and lovers. That's when he started to make moves. "Sometimes I just want to screw you so bad," he'd say, or, "if I could just see you in a thong." I wasn't about to have this at work, so I told my friend and manager. He blew me off, however, told me Lopez was a nice guy, that he'd take really good care of me if I let him. I was shocked by this. When I told the general manager, he went one step further and accused me of being homophobic. At this point, I knew it was up to me to handle this. The next Sunday when Lopez sat at the bar, I looked him dead in the face and said, "Don't screw with me today. I'm not interested, and I will not be harassed." Even while I spoke, Lopez's lips curled into a smile. He was pleased that he had shaken me this much. I felt immediately powerless. The following Sunday was to be my last. I had given notice and told everyone exactly why I was leaving. Lopez has been begging me every week to spend time with him after my shift. That past Sunday, when I had so unsuccessfully tough-talked him, he even waited for me outside. I was not going to let things progress any further. Since this was to be my first stretch of unemployment in a while, I had also decided to take advantage and realize a lifelong desire to visit Brazil. I had purchased tickets, but had not yet told anyone at work about these plans. That Sunday came around and went as usual, with Lopez sitting at his regular spot, lavishing me with compliments and repeatedly inviting me to his home. To my relief, he left well before my shift ended. As I headed home that late afternoon, however, I found myself staring straight into Lopez's face as I rounded a corner. He quickly locked arms with me and began steering me in a different direction. I freaked out immediately and recoiled. He apologized. "Hey, I know I give you a lot of crap, but it's all just a tease, you know that, right?" he said, and similar things. All of the sudden, Lopez didn't seem so bad. I actually felt a little guilty taking his advances so personally. In this frame of mind, I stupidly agreed to get a drink with him. We went to a brightly colored Mexican restaurant where everyone seemed to know Lopez. The whole group was about his age and definitely represented the leftovers of Greenwich Village's glory days. Things got strange, quickly. A wrinkled old lady in a miniskirt waltzed over and kissed Lopez on the cheek. Then, without even being introduced, slipped her hands in between my legs and began rubbing my upper thigh. When I backed away, she turned to Lopez and said, "You need to open this sweet young flower up." Keep in mind, she's talking about a bearded man, adding to the creepiness factor. He smiled at me and replied, "Oh, Chi-Chi, this one's too young and strong. We have to break him first." The feeling of sitting there and hearing two elderly people talk about me like a sexual favor that was about to be passed around was too much to handle. I got up and left. As I hit the door, and this was by far the worst part, Lopez called after me, "Leave now, but who knows what old friends you might just run into in Brazil." To this day, I still have no idea how he knew of my travel plans. I had told no one at my job, none of my other regulars, or anyone I knew that had contact with Lopez. Either way, cue 3 weeks of me perpetually looking over my shoulder in Rio de Janeiro. Fortunately, my stalker lost interest by the time I returned. But let me just emphasize, Lopez, let's never, ever meet again.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Katrina T, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Joseph F, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Steph L, Tammy S, Terry H, 2Eki for you, and Victor R. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay